Launch in 3, 2, 1.
Ahoy everyone, my name's Thomas, I'm a paleontologist, and today I'm going to talk to you about one of my favourite games, Subnautica. Now, Subnautica's not strictly speaking a paleontological game, but it has some really cool paleontological aspects, so excuse the pun, but let's just dive straight in. So firstly, for viewers that have never played Subnautica, this game is an open world survival game that was released in 2018 by Unknown Worlds Entertainment. Set in the future, in the 22nd century, you're a crew member aboard a ship called the Aurora, which is built by the Terra Corporation. You're on a mission to the edge of explored space to build a phase gate, which is basically a type of high-speed space travel infrastructure. But unfortunately for you, something goes horribly wrong, and you end up having to use an escape pod as your ship crashes down onto a mysterious planet called 4546b. What makes this game really unique is that planet 4546b is nearly entirely an oceanic planet. So in order to survive, we need to find food, water and resources to build ourselves a shelter. From there we can then go on and explore the unique biomes on the planet, but we can also recover technology from the crash sites, which allows us to dive deeper, and eventually create a space rocket so we can get home. This game is a great mix of survival, base building, and story-driven adventure, while having a beautiful yet often terrifying backdrop of exploring a deep and often dark ocean. If you have thalassophobia, which is the fear of open waters, this is not the game for you, and I'd probably stop the video right here. Now, this video isn't going to be a Let's Play of Subnautica, although let us know in the comments if that's a video series you think we should do. Instead, I'm going to show you a selection of interesting animals from Subnautica and some of the ecosystems, and then I'm going to chat to you a little bit about how they're similar to some amazing ancient animals, and I'm also going to introduce some really cool aspects of paleontology that you might not have heard of before. And for full transparency, I made this video fairly late into the game, and we're going to head to some of the later biomes, so there are some minor spoilers ahead. Don't say I didn't warn you. For the purpose of this video, I've manufactured a small submarine which I've called Thunderbird 4, and we'll be using it to explore one of the first biomes that you sort of visit in Subnautica called the Kelp Forests. So in the game, we have loads of these large plants called creep vines, and they're based on seaweeds called kelp. On Earth today, kelp forests are really important ecosystems that cover huge swathes of the nearshore in the northern and southern hemisphere, and they're home to hundreds of thousands of species of animal. One really cool fact about kelp is that, interestingly, it's not actually a plant, it's something called a heterocont, which means that it's actually a type of algae. Kelp can grow up to 80 meters in length and consists of a holdfast, which anchors itself to the seafloor, and then it has these large leaf structures which are called blades. Often, many species of kelp will have small bladders of gas in these blades called nematocysts, which help keep the kelp upright, and in Subnautica, these are actually harvestable and are full of an oily substance which you can use as a lubricant for machinery. This makes actually quite a lot of sense because oil is lighter than water and is therefore buoyant, so it would hold the creep vines upright. We don't actually know when kelp evolved, it doesn't readily turn into fossils, but we do know that it probably evolved around 5 to 20 million years ago. I think the kelp forests in Subnautica are probably my favourite biome, especially at night because the creep vines bioluminesce, they give off their own natural light. And one thing that's really cool about this game is that most of the creatures actually bioluminesce, which is something that you'll probably see as we go through the game. The kelp forests are also home to the stalker, one of the first large and terrifying predators you encounter in the early game. One of the first things you notice about the stalkers is their long rostrum filled with razor teeth. Rostrum's just a fancy way of saying beak, basically. The stalker's head looks like that of a gharial, which is a critically endangered long-nosed relative of a crocodile, and they're found in Nepal and India. But as a paleontologist, I think that an ancient animal could have been the inspiration for stalkers. See, ichthyosaurs are a group of marine reptiles that lived during the Triassic, Jurassic and Cretaceous, between 250 to 90 million years ago. There are lots of species of ichthyosaurs, but many of the earliest ichthyosaurs, such as the Myxanosauria, share a very similar body plan to the stalker. They have a long rostrum full of sharp teeth, 2 pairs of flippers, larger at the front, smaller at the back, and a long torpedo-like body. Ichthyosaurs were very active predators, and with powerful tails, large flippers for rudders, and a hydrodynamic body shape, ichthyosaurs chased down agile and quick prey, just like the stalker in the game. Stalkers seem to have a flat tail, similar to modern whales and dolphins, with 2 large symmetrical flukes that move up and down to push it through the water. But in comparison, sharks, fish, and ichthyosaurs all had vertical tails that pushed from side to side. Both sharks and early ichthyosaurs had asymmetrical tails, known as heterocircle tails. Another cool attention to detail is that the stalkers are counter-shaded. This is that they are lighter on their bellies and darker on the top of the animal. This camouflage pattern occurs in real life and is very common in fish, sharks, and mammals, especially those that live in the depth of the ocean where light can penetrate, known as the photic zone. Countershading makes animals harder to spot depending on the orientation that you're looking at it. So for instance, if you look at it from above, the animal blends into the darkness of the water below, and if you look at it below, the light skin underneath blends into sort of the sunlight. Amazingly, studies of fossilized ichthyosaur skin shows that they contain pigments, and that these ancient animals would have been countershaded as well, so another similarity between these 2 beasties. The next biome you visit on your underwater adventure is the slightly deeper bloodgrass plateaus. These host a variety of interesting and weird creatures and loads of wrecks for you to explore. We're going to need a little submersible for this, so I'm going to use my Seamoth and cruise deeper into the ocean. One creature that you'll notice very quickly in this area is this terrifying beastie, the sand shark. First thing off the bat, this creature is clearly not a shark. It has no tail, and it has a weird segmented exoskeleton, and it has these short stumpy legs that you can see on the underside. These creatures actually look much more like another ancient group of animals called Eurypterids, or giant sea scorpions. Now, I'm not an expert on Eurypterids, but there is a member of the Palaeocast Gaming Network who is, so I'm going to hand the microphone over to Dave Marshall.
Hello, Dave here. I'm a Eurypterid researcher, so I'm very happy to come and give you all an introduction to these fantastic animals. Unfortunately, the Eurypterids, also known as sea scorpions, are no longer with us, but they had a very good run indeed. They first appeared in the Ordovician period around 500 million years ago, and likely went extinct at the end Permian mass extinction, along with about 80% of all marine species, around 250 million years ago. That means they were on this planet for 250 million years, which is not too shabby really. Now, during their heyday, the sea scorpions were top predators, and some of the biggest animals on the planet. Some had large arms with multiple spikes for ambushing prey, others would rake the seafloor with comb-like arms for just about anything that they could sweep into their mouths. But the most impressive family of Eurypterids, in my opinion, were the Terra-Gotids. These were the biggest of all the sea scorpions and the largest arthropods ever to have existed, measuring up to an estimated 2.6 meters or 8.5 feet. Now, that top measurement is estimated because the largest fossil is only known from its teeth. The Terra-Gotids had their teeth on the end of long arms held in front of their heads, and so looked a lot like the pincers of modern scorpions. And these teeth were filled with more teeth, which were reinforced with metal, and these were used to capture, pierce, and crush prey, and we even have evidence of early fishes preserved with long lines of puncture holes in their heads, which correspond to the position of the teeth of one of these Terra-Gotids. Now, since the Eurypterids didn't have minerals in their exoskeletons like trilobites or, say, ammonites do, they're actually really hard to find as fossils. But the fossils, when we do find them, can be absolutely sublime. We can see where the sensory hairs were positioned on their bodies. We can reconstruct their eyesight and see how well they could see. And we can see details of their respiratory system, so we know that they might have been capable of short excursion on land. In fact, in reference to one of the earliest large-scale studies of Eurypterid, it's been claimed that it had become one of the most completely known of all extinct animals, and that our exact knowledge of it is quite comparable with that of its recent relatives. Which other fossils could we say that for? But in spite of having such amazing fossils, in spite of all that we have and could figure out about how they lived, and in spite of how they lightly shaped our own early evolution, Eurypterids are criminally overlooked by science, and you could count the number of active researchers on one hand. So I implore you to look them up. Every time you see a discussion of colours in dinosaurs, know that we've already established that Eurypterids could probably glow under UV light. When you see articles in the media about dinosaur skin impressions, know that I personally have split open rocks and removed the Eurypterid from inside with a pair of tweezers. All of this information and more is left sitting in the dusty drawers of museums and the shelves of libraries. The Eurypterid Renaissance begins today, and it begins with your advocacy. Thank you.
Wow, thanks Dave. That was a brilliant introduction and impassionate and frankly moving speech about his true love, Eurypterids. Around the Bloodgrass Plateaus are small caves filled with these weird creatures called drooping stingers. Although the game describes these things as flora, suggesting that they're plants, they actually very closely resemble jellyfish. Jellyfish is a really informal scientific term that encompasses a huge range of animals, mainly from the phylum Cnidaria. But one thing I can say is that they're definitely not fish, and they're not particularly jelly-like. Jellyfish are actually much more rubbery. Jellyfish are some of the oldest known multicellular animals, with 500 million year old fossil jellyfish being described, and potentially older examples are known. These fossils are pretty amazing when you think about it, because jellyfish are like 90% water and they have absolutely no hard parts, so the fact that these things even turn into a fossil is utterly amazing. I could make a whole episode about jellyfish because they're some of my favourite animals, and they're really fascinating. Like, did you know that jellyfish don't have any blood, and that their mouth doubles as their anus? One of my other favourite facts about jellyfish is that they've been taken into space by scientists aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger to see if they could breed in zero gravity. The experiments showed that they could, not a problem, but the jellies that were born in zero gravity, when they were brought back to Earth, they really freaked out when subjected to normal gravity and couldn't work out which way was up. So, poor jellies. The game's databank also tells you that the drooping stinger cannot photosynthesize and is carnivorous. If you touch them, you're met with this like green pulsating sensation simulating that you've been stung. Yeah, this is exactly what jellyfish in real life do, and many species have these long tentacles that are covered in specialised cells called nematocysts. Now, nematocysts basically fire microscopic venomous harpoons that deliver a complex cocktail of proteins to form a neurotoxin that attacks the nervous system, heart, and skin cells of their prey. These neurotoxins are capable of paralysing and killing small fish and crustaceans, and famously cause extreme pain and welts to human beings. In some species, such as the box jellyfish, there are thousands of these nematocysts in every square centimetre of tentacle, each delivering a potentially lethal dose of venom to a human being. In Subnautica though, the drooping stingers apparently use a different method to stun their prey. They use electricity to zap potential food. Currently, there are no living jellyfish on Earth that are known to do this. For our next animal, we're going to have to move into a deeper water ecosystem. On Earth, and on planet 4546b, once we pass about 300 meters, light can't penetrate this deep, so we move out of the photic zone and into the dysphotic, or twilight zone. Down here, if we don't have an artificial light, it's pretty dark and full of very scary things that want to eat us. One of the most aggressive predators at this depth is the bone shark. This beastie is hyper aggressive and will chase you down pretty quickly in the game and rip you apart. At first glance, these animals do kind of look shark-like, although note that their tail orientation is much more mammal-like, a bit like the stalker that we saw earlier. The head of the bone shark does look a little bit similar to frilled sharks, which is a type of deep water shark that lives in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, which also lives around about 200 to 300 meters in depth. But what interests me about the bone shark is it has this external armoured skeleton. This might seem pretty strange, but actually millions of years ago this was an evolutionary adaptation used by fish to protect themselves by predators. Between 430 to 350 million years ago, armoured fish thrived in the oceans, filling loads of evolutionary niches. These animals were called placoderms. One cool thing about placoderms that you need to know is that placoderms actually had an internal and an external skeleton. So they had an endoskeleton and an exoskeleton. The other cool thing about placoderms is that they were the first fish to have jaws. You might have heard about or even seen a placoderm without even realising, because one of the most famous is Dunkleosteus, an extinct placoderm fish that lived during the late Devonian period, about 358 to 382 million years ago. Dunkleosteus was an absolute unit. It's a 9 metre long, 4-ton armoured fish with thick armour plates and massive jaws. Now, scientists have calculated that Dunkleosteus could generate bite forces of around about 7,000 newtons. That's easily enough to slice through and rip apart the armour of other placoderms. But scientists have also discovered that they might have been ripping apart other Dunkleosteus. There is significant evidence of cannibalism in these fossils. Dunkleosteus has been found in fossils all around the world, so it probably had a worldwide distribution, and is often commonly referred to as one of the first super predators, which makes Dunkleosteus an absolute badass. In order to get to my last cool Subnautica fossil crossover, we need to dive down to some of the deepest biomes in Subnautica, to the Brine Caves. Brine is salt water that is hypersaline. This means the water contains between 3 to 8 times as much salt as normal seawater. On Earth, brine pools are normally found below ice sheets or in the deep ocean, and they are incredibly inhospitable environments. This is because not only are brine waters incredibly salty, but they have very low levels of dissolved oxygen, and they're commonly associated with nasty chemicals like hydrogen sulfides and methanes. So if an animal swims into the brine, when they try to breathe the salty water, they normally die very quickly due to toxic shock. But because the brine is so inhospitable to bacteria that would normally digest a carcass, the animals just kind of don't rot, they become pickled. This is a really cool phenomenon, and it's something which I actually study as part of my job learning how fossils form, which is a science called Taphonomy. So who'd have ever thought that the bones in the caves of a computer game would be similar to my day job? These fossils also remind me of one of my other favourite natural phenomena, the whale fall. After a whale dies, its body sinks to the seafloor. Now, if it sinks close to the coast, it will be scavenged by animals and bacteria in a matter of weeks. But if the carcass falls into water deeper than 1,000 meters, or into the abyssal zone, then the huge pressure and freezing temperature can slow the rate of decay so the carcass can last for decades. In this deep ocean environment, these whale falls can allow an incredibly specialised and unique ecosystem to form, including species that are very highly specialised specifically for living on whale falls. Animals like hagfish, sleeper sharks, crustaceans galore, weird octopuses, all sorts of things have been observed eating whale falls. Even a weird polychaete worm called Ossidax, or the zombie worm, that eats only whalebone, has been found chomping through whale carcasses. Now, we've known about whale falls only since the 1970s, when small robot submarines called ROVs were able to find one, but amazingly, whale fall fossils have actually been found. These fossils from Italy and America date between 34 to 22 million years ago, and they show that early whales had much less fat content than modern whales, and so the ecosystems that colonised them was very different from modern whale falls. But more recent whale falls have been found in Japan and California, which range between 23 to 5 million years old, and they are much more similar to today's whale fall ecosystems. One cool thing about whale falls is that researchers estimate that there are around 690,000 carcasses / skeletons of the 9 largest whale species in all of the oceans. So this basically means that they, on average, space between 12 kilometers each. So it means that these specialized animals can basically migrate and hop from carcass to carcass to carcass. That's pretty weird and pretty cool. But with that, it's time to blow our ballast tanks and head back to the surface. Subnautica has loads of other weird and wonderful beasties to find and to avoid in case they are hungry. But I would really strongly recommend this game. It's great fun, and it has an excellent DLC pack which opens up a brand new Arctic biome. Remember to like the video if you enjoyed it, and please consider subscribing if you haven't already. And we'll see you in the next episode.